My name is Forber-Pratt, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director at CERI. We are just overwhelmingly grateful that you're here. We serve around the world with the vision of protecting childhood. And one of the ways we do that is knowing the current conditions of all of our country offices. And so today we'll be focusing on our Moldova country office and hearing from incredible speakers, stories of heart, but actually give us the kind of clear understanding of what's going on the ground. Before we start, I would like to share 3 Bible verses with you all. It is an idea that we cast out. People of different faiths, of different backgrounds might be on the call, but we would like to share these verses. They're from the New International Version of the Bible, as well as the King James Version of the Bible. So I'm going to read 3 verses here. The first one is from Isaiah 26. It's a song of praise. And it says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever. For the Lord himself is the rock eternal." And from James 1:2-4, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you are involved in various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. But you must let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." And Proverbs 3:5-6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." So I hope that sets us on a tone this morning to hear our incredible speakers. So I'd like to just share quickly what this next hour will look like, and then hand the microphone off to our fearless leader at CERI. So starting off, I'm just giving the welcome, and then I'll hand the microphone over to Connie. Then we'll have stories from Katya and Irina, and you'll get full introductions on everybody as we move forward. And then Connie will introduce our incredible keynote speaker, Mr. Valeriu Ghilețchi, and he will share just everything from the ground from his perspective. He's an incredible man and change maker. At the end, at 12:45 Central Time, we'll have a question and answer section, but please put questions into the chat. I will be engaging you in the chat. Feel free to kind of dialogue back and forth. In that 12:45 to 1 o'clock Central Time space, I will be kind of asking the questions that you put in the chat, so we can have anything from your end, and then we will finish up. So again, we're so grateful that you're here. And now I would like to hand the microphone off to CERI's Executive Director, Dr. Connie Belciug. She grew up in Moldova and joined CERI in 2002. So she's uniquely positioned to kind of help us transition into our discussion. Connie, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Such a great to be here and to see these familiar faces. Tony, hi, haven't seen you in probably 10 years. Marilyn, Joe, Rick, and everybody else maybe that I don't recognize right now on the call. It is such an honor to see you. This pandemic definitely brought one good thing, and that is the rise of these virtual events and technologies. And now we can all share from the comfort of our homes and kitchens and offices. I wish I was in my kitchen though. Feel free to grab some lunch and just, listen in. We value your presence here. Thank you for being here. Today's event has been designed to be somewhat future focused and talk about the situation in the Russia, Ukraine, Moldova region with an eye for what's coming next, what should be preparing for next. We at CERI believe that the future is bright and that the future is near. We work towards a better world for our children, for all children around the world. And in our work, we trust in God, and we believe that as a community, all of us together, we can move the needle forward on everything that impacts children in this world. So thank you for being part of our community, of the CERI community, and working alongside us, making this world a better place for everybody. So today we're going to talk about the impact of the Russian war on the region, Eastern European region, and the entire world. We're going to share some stories of refugees and the situation in Moldova. And again, we're going to try to read those tea leaves and, try to understand what is the future bringing. Nobody here reads tea leaves and predicts the future, but what we can do is look at the world through the lens of our life experiences, through the lens of our professional backgrounds, through the lens of where we lived. And the majority or most of our speakers today live in the region or have lived in the region for most of their lives, and have great wisdom to share with us. So I would like to introduce our next two presenters. The first one is Miss Ecaterina Babin, whom most of you know. Ecaterina is a dear friend and colleague of mine. She has worked for CERI in Moldova for 13 years. I might be wrong here, but I'm probably ballparking it well. Katya also served as CERI Moldova's National Program Director for 6 years. She's a social worker by education, and she currently serves as our Refugee Response Coordinator, providing leadership and expertise within our Ukrainian refugee-focused program in Moldova. Ecaterina, her husband Ivan, and their 2 children live currently in Seattle, or near Seattle, Washington. The next presenter after Katya will be Miss Irina Rotaru. Irina is also a dear friend and colleague of mine. We basically grew up in the same church since we were, 15 or what. She is the CERI Moldova National Program Director. And before this position, she had served as a marketing and communications coordinator since 2017. Currently, Irina leads all of our programs in Moldova with a passion for underserved and commitment to excellence. Irina lives in Chișinău, Moldova, and enjoys teaching and volunteering in her community. Thank you so much, Ecaterina. I'm going to give you the microphone right now, and I'm going to listen carefully to what you say.
Hello, and thank you for having me at this event. It is really great joy to see familiar faces. Russia's war on Ukraine has created a lot of anxiety in former Soviet countries, perhaps the most vulnerable one being Moldova. Right now, I would like to share a story next. This is a story about Elena, and Elena is a 26-year-old young lady, Ukrainian, who found herself homeless and unemployed on the streets of Chișinău in March 2022. Elena found a shelter and Baptist church in Chișinău. 3 months later, CERI Moldova hired her as a data processing specialist. Every day, Elena diligently captures the work being done with Ukrainian refugees. She hopes her compatriots feel empowered as she did when she met CERI. Recently, Elena learned that her house in Kherson had been occupied by Russian soldiers. She asked friends to pass a message to them, begging them not to destroy the pictures of her father that are still in the house. The photos are the only physical memory of him. Elena believes with the help of CERI, she is winning her fight with depression. In the past, she recalls feeling as she had died and woke up in hell. Now, with God's help and the trust of her colleagues, Elena is ready to keep fighting to bright light and peace into the world. As you can see, my prediction for the future is that as long as there are needs, there will be a people who will jump and offer help for those in needs. Then the needs grow, the blessing grow, and God always protects, always provides, and never disappoints. I believe the assistance to refugees and displaced children and the families will only grow. As you can see, huge challenges provide huge opportunities to do good. There is an African proverb saying, Help me during the flood, and I will help you during the drought. We all can lend a help when we are in situation to do that. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your continued support to CERI and those who serve around the world. And I want to pass word to my colleague, Irina.
So much. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so glad to be with you today. At this event, I'd like to share some things about life in Moldova and what we do at CERI here. So, as you already know, because most of you been with us for a long time, we have a long history of helping children and families in Moldova. This July, we celebrated our 21st anniversary of Protected Childhood in Moldova, and it was a time when we expressed our gratitude to everybody, absolutely everybody who made it possible for us to help children, to help families. This past year was a little bit different for us, and of course, you know the reasons why. Our country is a small country in Europe, and we lack many resources, so we are dependent on our neighbors or other countries in the region, those countries being Russia, Ukraine, or Romania. So after Russia announced the rise or the increase of gas price at the end of 2021, we were startled and we were alarmed. And then the war in Ukraine started. We've lived through a period of changes for us. First of all came the changes in prices for products and services when we seen the shortage of products and on the shelves. Also, we've seen people who needed our help, many who fled the war and who they just needed a friend. They just needed somebody to lend them a hand. And we've been those people who did it in a way or another. As already Katya was telling us about the ACM program, which is a wonderful thing, and it's extraordinary that we are able to do it. But our people in Moldova, as well as the refugees who came to live with us, we are very much affected by everything that is going on. Since the war started, we've been doing kind of an exercise in resilience here, as many would say that what we've experienced in the last 12 months it's never been part of our life before. So for you to understand what it actually meant, the price for gas, for natural gas, was increased 6 times. And the price for electricity was increased 3 or 4 times. So now we're paying 7 times the price of gas, which we paid a year ago, and almost 4 times the price of it for electricity. It is very concerning for us, and every day people here are thinking about their lives and about how they're going to manage it. Some of my colleagues are saying that they're not surprised about anything that is going on. They just try to focus on how to provide for their families the best way they can. And they do provide, and we do provide not just for our families, but also for our beneficiaries. Beneficiaries who have a lot of needs that was with them before the war. Families that have issues before the war, and after the war started, they just had to deal with both of them. So for you to understand better what I'm talking about, please imagine that you are an 8-year-old child, and you are very active. Maybe somebody would even say that you are rambunctious at times, but you are a very nice child that is just willing to have a deep desire to live and to have a good life. But you come from a vulnerable family. Your parents or your single parent is actually able to provide even less than the bare minimum. And on top of that, you have a learning and a speaking disability, an impediment that makes you not so desirable to be as a friend for others and have difficulties when you go to school. This is the story of one of our beneficiaries, Anton, who is a very nice boy who wants a better life. But because of his background, he was not able to have it to a certain point. Not having the support of his mom, because she was not able to provide it, they found the support in CERI, who paid for a speech specialist, and now he is speaking clearly and is able to pronounce many wonderful sounds, and also had the support of his case managers who advocated for him in school, for him to be able to learn better. Now he is one of, maybe not the best students in his class, but a very nice, very successful young child. This is the things that is going on in their lives. So adding to that a war or a situation of crisis, it's very difficult. And they are extremely grateful that we've been able to be close to them, to be near them and helping them and helping also our staff, who has increased because of them, or thanks to the ECM program. We've been able to provide stable workplace for 8 new hires, which is amazing. So now we are just praying for peace, and we are praying for the war to end. It is our deepest desire for people to be able to go back home. And even if they don't go back home, to have a wonderful life. Also, we want for our beneficiaries to thrive here in Moldova and not be in a risk of ever getting into a war zone. We are thankful that we are able to do it, and we are thankful for everybody who is supporting us in this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Katya, Irina. Thank you for the stories that you have shared with us and the beautiful picture of resilience that you have presented. I still believe that the future is bright. I still believe that with people like you, with services, with support, children and families in the region will be able to thrive and won't have to be pushed out of their homes into migration, forced migration, and other things like that. I would like to introduce our next speaker. His name is Valeriu Ghilețchi, and I'm honored to call him a friend of mine. Mr. Valeriu Ghilețchi, I'm going to have to read from the paper to introduce you because it's a lot, and you know, I can't memorize all this. But at this moment, Mr. Ghilețchi serves as the assistant to the vice chair of the Committee for Foreign Affairs and European Integration in Moldova's parliament. Mr. Ghilețchi's background also includes being a former member and a deputy speaker of Moldova's parliament, chair of the European People Parliament Group, secretary of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and European Integration, member and vice chair of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, as well as honorary member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and much more, trust me. In his academic and human rights focused career, Mr. Ghilețchi served as president of the European Baptist Federation, member of the Committee for Human Rights, Religions, Ethnical Minorities, and Foreign Communities, dean at the College of Theology and Education in Chișinău, bishop of Moldova's Baptist Union, and pastor. Mr. Ghilețchi is married to his wife, Marina, has 3 children and 6 grandchildren. And I have the privilege of knowing his wonderful family, having worked with Mr. Ghilețchi in several capacities for quite a number of years. I'm always excited to listen to his words of wisdom. And I want to thank you for accepting our invitation and a sharing of your perspective with our audience tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Connie. I'd like to share about the war in Ukraine from different angles, actually from 4 angles. And the first one is a political dimension, because I believe it's an important dimension when we speak about the war in Ukraine. And my first point is, if I look back, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and it happened in 91, I believe there was a lost opportunity for countries like Moldova and Ukraine. In 91, I was 31 years old. I'm 62 this year. So you can see that half of my life I lived in the USSR, and half of my life I lived in the independent Republic of Moldova. And if I again look back, there was a great opportunity for countries like Moldova and Ukraine to join the West. But unfortunately, at that time, the West was somehow hesitating to accept our countries in the European Union, in NATO. There was a time when Russia was very weak. And for example, Mr. Yeltsin, who was the president of Russia before Mr. Putin, he had the famous saying, which goes like this: take as much democracy as you want. Later, when Mr. Putin became the president of Russia, he changed the policy, the foreign policy of Russian Federation, and he started to revive, basically, his desire was to revive the Soviet Union. In his opinion, one of the biggest drama of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So when the war started this year, it was like a wake-up call. We understood that the history didn't stop with the collapse of the Soviet Union. There is maybe you heard of this name, Francis Fukuyama. He wrote a famous book that was published after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The name of the book was The End of History and the Last Man. And in his book, he came with kind of a vision, an analysis that was trying to tell the world that because the evil empire collapsed, there is a new age for the whole world history. There will be peace and prosperity. This is why he called or entitled his book The End of History. The war proved that the history didn't end. The history goes on, and in fact, 3 years later, in 95, his professor, Samuel Huntington, wrote another book that is also known, which is called Clash of Civilizations. And in his book, Samuel Huntington actually proved that that is a wrong thesis to believe that the history ended and there will be peace and prosperity. And after Samuel Huntington published his book, some people believe it was like kind of a prophetical book because, 6 years later, we had 9/11. So you can see that the history kind of like repeats itself, and we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware of the fact that there is no such thing as, such thing as end of history. So when the war started, Mr. Putin actually, he came with a threat. He said that countries that interfere with Russian actions will face consequences you have never seen. And the war was not a big surprise for the United States based on the information they shared with Ukraine. But it was still a kind of surprise and something unexpected for the world. It was kind of a shock to see that Russian Federation attacked another Slavic nation, Ukraine. And that war, as I said, was a wake-up call for Europe and I believe for the whole world. We saw deep divisions in Western Europe. And Mr. Putin took advantage of these deep divisions in Western Europe. And even today, Europe is somehow united, but there are different countries, they look differently at the war. So far, United States, they offer the best Western political and military support to Ukraine. So again, from a political point of view, what we see is a new stage in our world history. Unfortunately, not a pleasant stage, but we must accept that this is again part of history, part of humankind history. And again, we must accept that this is a war. Even Mr. Putin was trying to use a different rhetoric, different wording. He would say that he keeps saying this is a special military operation. He avoids to use the term war when it speaks about war in Ukraine. Now, the second angle, from a military dimension, now we can see that Putin, fortunately for Ukraine and fortunately for the West, made big mistakes when he launched the war. We can see now it was a poor planning and poor leadership. The Minister of Defense and the head of army and the head of secret services, he relied on the information they provided for him. And they even announced that in 3 days they will be in Kiev. Unfortunately for them, unfortunately for Ukraine and for the West, this didn't happen. Russia underestimated Ukrainian resilience. And this you can say also about the West. Most Western leaders, they were amazed to see such strong Ukrainian resilience. And there is a famous saying, a famous kind of like reply of Mr. Zelensky, who is the president of Ukraine, when Mr. Biden offered him help to flee the country. He said something like this, that I don't need a ride, I need weapons. And so far, Mr. Zelensky never left Ukraine. He stayed in Ukraine with his people, supporting the army, defending their land. Western aid and weapons made a huge difference. And the Western weapons helped Ukrainian army a lot. At the beginning, Western countries, especially European Union countries, they were a bit reluctant. They were not sure that Ukraine will be able to defend itself. But Ukrainian army not only was able to defend the Ukraine, they had a counteroffensive in Kharkov and Kherson region. So we can see it from a military point of view that Ukraine, they amazed the whole world with their resilience and resistance. Now, coming to the social and humanitarian dimension, each war, in particular this war, was very dramatic. You can say a humanitarian crisis, a humanitarian drama. Around 7 million refugees, 450,000 refugees, almost 500,000 refugees cross Moldovan border. About 100,000 of them decided to stay in Moldova. As of today, we have less refugees, but still the number is around 60,000, 70,000 refugees in Moldova. It's very good for us as churches to see that churches and mission organizations gave the quickest and the best response to this humanitarian crisis, to the refugee crisis. And for us, it was very helpful to have partnerships. And partnerships are playing a great role. And a partnership with CERI was a great blessing for Moldovan churches, for Moldovan Baptist Union to face this refugee crisis. But the need is still there and is still great. And winter is coming. Basically, winter already started. And the winter is a big challenge for Ukraine and including Moldova. Because as of today, unfortunately, most of about half of the electrical infrastructure of Ukraine was destroyed by Russian missiles. Ukraine lacks electricity. They cannot heat their homes. They cannot have good communication with each other. So that is a real problem and challenge for Ukraine. So as I said, the need is still great. And for this reason, we still have many refugees in Moldova. They don't want to go back. One reason is there are still airstrikes, but the other reason is there is no electricity, there is no heat, and that is a big challenge for them. Now, the fourth angle, the theological and spiritual dimension. Well, the war somehow motivated churches to redefine or to rethink the concept of war. We, like you in the United States, have lived in peace for almost, more than 50 years, actually more than 70 years. And when the war started in our region, we realized that we need somehow a theological reflection. What is a war? What should be the answer of churches and Christians to a war like this? And I'll give you just an interesting example. I was invited to a TV show on February 4th. It was just 20 days before the war started. And I spoke about war. And it's not that I, predicted the war, but in that TV talk show, I mentioned and underlined that the war may become a reality. On February 20, in my church, in Jesus the Savior Church, I preached, and the title of the sermon was War and Peace. And on 21st of February, I left for the United States. 3 days later, the war started. And while I was in the United States, I actually visited also CERI. While I was in the United States, after the war started, somebody in my church told me that people in the church, they were talking to each other saying, look, brother Valeriu Ghilețchi, he preached about the war and he left for USA. He knew that the war would start and he just decided to escape the war and left for USA. Of course, I didn't have any knowledge or information that the war would start, but there was that feeling in the air that the war might start very soon. So again, it's very important for churches, and especially in our region, I see in Ukrainian churches how important it is for them to find an answer how to behave in a war like this. So the concept of just war and just peace are very relevant for many churches today. Unfortunately, the war caused a huge polarization in churches, especially in Slavic-speaking churches. I know some Slavic-speaking churches, they prohibited to pray in the church about the war or even for peace in Ukraine, because when someone starts praying in his or her prayer, they may blame either Russia or Ukraine, and this leads to, again, a kind of like confrontation in the church. There is a polarization that unfortunately is still on, especially in Slavic-speaking churches. If you go and look what Russian churches say, of course, in Ukraine, there is more unity, but there is no that unity in the body of Christ today, especially in Slavic-speaking churches in the United States. There is also division and polarization when it comes to war. Now, my last point, what's next? Well, Connie had the kind of like, she was very positive, and I appreciate this, and I consider myself also an optimist, and I'm trying to be optimist, but as of today, my opinion is that the war will not end soon. This war will go longer than we think. The price is very high. Stakes are very high. Your Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, he said something like this: if Russia stops fighting, there'll be no more war. But if Ukraine stops fighting, there'll be no more Ukraine. So for Ukraine, the war is an existential one. they already paid a very high price, and they are not willing to just, stop fighting. And this is, again, a very difficult situation for them. I talked yesterday with a Ukrainian former member of parliament, and he told me that the mentality now is like this: we'd rather suffer one winter from the lack of gas and electricity than to live under Russians the rest of our life. So for them, again, it's very existential to fight, to continue their fight. On the other hand, Mr. Putin doesn't show any signs to stop the war. For him, it's a matter of, again, life or death. It's his dignity, his pride, and he is not willing to stop this war. So as I said, as of today, I don't see any soon end. So that the war, I don't see a close end to this war. Possible scenarios. Of course, they talk about three main possible scenarios. Victory. Every part, kind of like dreams on or wants to achieve victory. Ukraine wants victory. Russia also wants victory. Nobody knows. As it looks today, Ukraine has a little advantage, but it's far from a final victory. And for Ukraine, victory means to regain the control of the whole their territory. The second scenario, peace agreement. And we see that Russia says that they are open to discuss a peace agreement. There are talks in the West, in the European Union, in the United States. But at the same time, what I respect is that United States, for example, they do not put pressure on Ukrainians. They understand the concept of just peace. Peace agreement for Russia means to accept that those territories that they took from Ukraine would belong to Russia. And for Ukraine, this is not acceptable at all, given the price they already paid in this war. The third scenario is cease of fire, a frozen conflict. So this is the last scenario is more kind of like acceptable for the Russian side. They want to freeze this conflict to gain some time and also to somehow strengthen their control in the territories they already took from the Ukraine, including Crimea. So this is, again, the possible scenarios today. So we need to pray. Of course, we as Christians are called to pray, and we need to pray for just peace. We need to pray for the end of this war, but we also need to be aware that the war will continue much longer after it ends. I mean, wounds are so deep, from a moral, from a, emotional, from ethnic point of view. These wounds are very, very deep. And as I said, I believe the war will continue much longer after it ends. Of course, Mr. Putin is speaking about New World Order. How will this New World Order look like? Nobody knows. But so far, everyone rediscovers its strengths and vulnerabilities. It's the same I believe, in Europe and in the United States. We are in this difficult stage of our history, and as Christians, again, we are called to support justice, to support peace, and as I said, pray for just peace. And I will end with one, just kind of like, when I emphasize prayer, I like also to say there is a Latin phrase which goes like ora et labora. This motto belonged to a monastery. I think it was in the 5th century. A monastery. They came with this again motto, ora et labora, which, if you translate from Latin, means pray and act. So I will conclude with this, this call. Let us pray, but let us act also. And of course, God is in control. We do believe in his sovereignty, but here in our region, the war goes on, and we need to be aware of this. And again, let us do what's in our capacity and trust God that he will do the rest. Let's do our best and God will do the rest. I'll stop here, and if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Mr. Ghilețchi, thank you so much for giving us those insights. I would love to open it up to questions. I'm going to start us off with a question, and then if you'd like to virtually raise your hand down in the bottom, you've got a reactions button that you could raise your hand, or literally raise your hand, and I'll ask people to unmute and to share. Mr. Ghilețchi, you gave us a powerful look at political and spiritual and strategic aspects. I'd love to hone in a little bit on the future in a humanitarian way. So we serve children and families. The idea is to protect their childhood. And I'm wondering, I mean, you have the ears and the eyes on the ground. How is the Moldovan government feeling? What are their biggest concerns and biggest hopes for children and families right now?
Well, our government is pressed with a lot of needs, and I already mentioned energy is a big challenge for our government. So when it comes to children, unfortunately, they don't have enough resources, and probably not much attention is given to children needs. And here I'm very glad that we have organizations like CERI. We have, churches that are more sensitive to this humanitarian need. And together, I think we can do much more than our government, because government, as I said, they are focused on bigger needs, and they are focused on security, energy. So these are the needs our government is focused on today. But together, churches, non-government organizations, I think we can do a lot helping children of refugees. And again, we don't know what to expect during the winter or, in the spring, what would happen in Ukraine. As I mentioned, I am optimistic, but at the same time realistic. I don't see an end of this war in the near future. And for this reason, we need to be prepared, to work hard and to bring more resources to help, in particularly children, because one of your focuses, of course, is to help children. They are our future.
Thank you very much. There's a question that has come into the chat box. How would people who wish to immigrate to the U.S. as a refugee from Ukraine after the war ends, or after the area where they currently live is liberated? So how might they do that? Well,
I know that Ukrainians, they can immigrate to USA now. At least there is a kind of like open door. I don't know all the logistic details, but if the war ends, I don't think that this door will stay open, because the door is open for immigration as long as the war is on or goes on. Even those who immigrated to the United States during the war, from what I know, they are given a temporary status, temporary refugee status. They are not given a permanent refugee status in the United States. The idea is as soon as the war is over, those Ukrainians are expected to return to their homeland. So this is the policy of the United States today. If Connie would like to add to this, probably she may add, but I know several people I know personally, they got this temporary refugee status in the United States during the war. From Odessa region, I know a couple, they moved to Atlanta. So, but again, after the war is over, then probably this will not be possible, and I don't see the point. Now, when the war is on and their life is threatened, of course, there is a point for them to, to immigrate to a safe country.
Thank you. Opportunity for anyone. Does anyone have any questions? You're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask. I have a whole long list here of questions in front of me, but just wanted to give you all the opportunity. Great question in the chat box. How would you assess the levels of basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter, are being met?
Well, when it comes to Moldova, we are more or less okay. Of course, the need for refugees is a continuous need, especially given the fact that it's winter now, so warm clothes and winter shoes are very welcome and needed. But when it comes to Ukraine, the situation is much worse in Ukraine. We have churches in Moldova. We have some, humanitarian organizations in Moldova. They are trying to help Ukrainians are trying to help Ukrainians through Ukrainian churches. Just last week, I know that somebody from Moldova went to Kherson. Kherson was recently liberated, but it's still under, missile strikes, and the situation is just awful there. And they went there with some humanitarian aid. So when we speak about Ukrainian, cities and villages, the need is much greater than in Moldova. But even here, as I said, because Moldova is a poor country, given the fact that we are in the winter time now, the clothes, warm clothes and warm shoes is needed and very welcome.
And you mentioned about Moldova being a poor country. There are already challenges within the country that I know. I'm curious if you'd speak a little bit about the dynamics between Moldovans who might already be in need and the influx of refugees that are staying there. Well,
Moldova, it's kind of a good testimony for Moldovans. They open their arms, they open their homes, and Ukrainians are very grateful to discover our warm hospitality. And as I said, because we had good partners like you and other partners, we were able to meet those needs. Now, because they stay longer here, for example, in our church, in Jesus the Savior Church, because it's winter time, the gas bills or bills for gas, bills for electricity are very, very high. So that is a challenge for, especially if we talk about families, but even for my own church. We talked last Sunday about this, and we challenged our church members to give sacrificially, because the bills for gas and electricity are very, very high. So that is one of the biggest needs now in the winter time. When it comes to electricity and heat, that is a serious need.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask another question, future leaning, but so that we could all put on a prayerful hat, no matter what faith we're following, the idea of what can we truly be cherishing? You've said you're an optimist and a realist. Yeah. What can we be cherishing and praying about that are the true needs in this coming winter and moving forward for Moldovans and those incredible Moldovans who have opened their homes to refugees?
Well, first of all, I think the dearest or the most precious thing is peace. So we need to pray for peace, because if you have peace, then somehow you can cope with other needs. Again, if I look what happens in Ukraine and I talk with them and I hear their stories, I feel that I am so blessed that in Moldova we still have peace. And we always remind our church members to continue to pray for peace. So this should be a continuous need to pray for peace. We also need to pray for people to survive this winter. I mean, to pray for, already mentioned this, and I'm repeating myself, the winter is very harsh on many Moldovans because of high bills. High prices for electricity and gas are extremely high, very, very high. Even the government did the fundraising. They asked different nations to donate to our country. And the government is doing I mean, it's best probably they cover part of those bills. They subsidize part of those bills depending on your level of income. So they organize kind of like 3 or 4 levels of subsidizing to help poor families in Moldova, because this is again one of the greatest need for this winter. Not to freeze, to survive somehow until spring, until the weather gets warm again. So far, the winter is not so harsh, but it's still very cold. It is very cold outside, and that is the second, I would say, need that you can have in mind and pray for it. Pray for peace, pray for these high prices related to this energy crisis. No, and I think probably we need also to pray for, how to say it, you see, sometimes I say it as a joke, but I think there is some truth in it. There is a Psalm 109 verse 8 that goes like this: let his days be few and somebody else take his place of leadership. So some leaders deserve this prayer. I really want to see a radical change in Russia, because as long as Mr. Putin is leading Russia, we will not probably see an end to this war. So I dare even we can put it in a more mild way. Let's pray, for leadership of Russia, so there will be a radical change. Because as Mr. Blinken said, if Russia stops fighting, there'll be no more war. It's so simple. If they stop fighting, there'll be no more war. So we need this. And I am praying. In my prayer, I dare to ask God, to intervene. Because we read in the Bible, he is sovereign and he can do anything he wants. So, of course, should be according to his will. But again, this would be, let's say, 3 prayer needs. Maybe the third one is more difficult for some, but because I'm in this region here, I dare to mention it.
All right, Mr. Ghilețchi, we have only 1 more minute left. We want to be conscious of everyone's time, but a very important question has come into the chat box. If you wouldn't mind giving a brief answer, and then we'll turn it over to Connie to close. What's your opinion on whether Russia will turn its sights on Moldova?
Well, it's, how to say, it's not so, I would not call it, it's very likely. I cannot exclude this. But Russia has real problems with Ukraine now. So as long as Ukraine resists, I think Moldova is okay.
Thank you so much, Connie. I will hand it over to you. My mind is just reeling.
Sure. So basically, to answer this last question that came in, the reward is too small for Russia to invest in a major campaign in Moldova. Moldova is so small, and so I'll just leave it at small. Just to close, what I heard is we're all taking peace for granted. Let's not continue doing that. Let's cherish peace. Let's pray for peace, and let's actively pursue peace. And also, to summarize from a human-centered perspective, what's waiting for us in the future is a need for forgiveness and reconciliation. I do trust and do believe that this war won't be around for too many more years, and that it will eventually end. At that point in time, we're going to have to work as a global community on reconciliation, forgiveness, and mending bridges and relationships between nations. And my last thought, as a summary, is also when need is great, there's a great need for people to step up and support. Does it make sense? When there's great need or great needs, people have great needs, children and families have huge needs. There's also a great need for people to step up and support. And I want to thank the audience because you represent the CERI community. Many of you already support CERI, the children, the families that we walk alongside with, and you have already provided the support. I want to encourage you to stay with us, to keep supporting. The needs are growing, although us in the field, of child protection, humanitarian, international development, we're hoping to achieve these wonderful goals in the future where, there's no more needs, there's no more poverty, there's no more homelessness. Still, the needs somehow keep growing. So thank you to all the speakers, and thank you to the audience. I'm grateful for the perspectives that you share, and I'm grateful for the questions that have been asked. I hope you learned something new. I hope this was a moment of learning for you, and a moment of coming together to make a difference in this world, and coming together to know what's coming next, what to do next, as far as the Russia war in Ukraine. Thank you so much. Thank you for continuing to support CERI, and have a wonderful afternoon. Merry Christmas and wonderful winter holidays. Many blessings to everyone. Many blessings to you. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.